Say, I don't know what happened there. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thanks for joining this afternoon. We're going to continue with our conversation about the opportunity that we have to significantly fund our public school system and with our student-based funding formula, progress that we're making there. We have we have a couple of guest speakers. We actually have three that we wanted to give the opportunity to say a few words just about their experience with this process and what we hope will be, or what we know is important and what we hope will be the outcome of this funding formula process. First of all, we have with us Elizabeth Brown. Elizabeth is a senior in high school and in Coffee County High School. This is a student-based funding formula, and having students involved in the process was important. She actually chaired our student committee and was involved in town halls and has been an important part of this process. So Elizabeth will share a bit of her perspective. We have Jared Bingham, who is a board member with the Tennessee Rural Education Association. He's also a senior advisor to the Tennessee Chamber of Commerce. So Jared will talk a bit about really workforce development, how this formula is a part of preparing students for life after the classroom and the work associated with the things they've learned through their public school education experience. And finally, we'll have Victor Evans, who was one of our committee chairs. He serves as executive director of Tennessee CAN to give his perspective on the process as well. And then we'll have follow-up with Commissioner Schwinn at the end. So Elizabeth, if you would please come up, and we're grateful that you joined us today. Share a few of your comments.
Serving as chair on this wonderful subcommittee has been an opportunity like no other. It was an absolute honor to hold this position, and I thank Commissioner Schwinn for believing in me and her incredible staff for answering any questions I had along the way. I can confidently say I know much more about public school funding than I did going into this. It was truly an amazing experience. On behalf of the students in the Student Engagement Subcommittee, we are so thankful our voice was heard. Being a part of this made us feel appreciated as students, and we appreciated the chance to speak up for our students in public education in the wonderful state of Tennessee. Every meeting, we advocated diligently for topics we're passionate about. And to Governor Lee and the steering committee, thank you for hearing us. Our student group was unique because we were composed of strictly students. We each brought something different to the table, and we each had our own circumstances. However, I can tell you one thing. We were there to meet the needs of our students. As a group, we had a perspective that most of the other subcommittees did not, because we are in the classrooms and in the hallways with our peers every single day. And who better to know the needs of students than students themselves? Students are the forefront of this formula, and they are a vital component in crafting an effective student-based funding formula. This formula will benefit the state as a whole. We are the next teachers, the next doctors, the next lawyers, and the next engineers. With this model, students are prepared for their future. When students are heard, their needs are prioritized. Something that I learned from the past several weeks is that when you give a student the chance to share their voice, they are glad to speak out. Personally, I'm a member of my Student Government Association back at Coffee County High School. Each day, we get 20 minutes together in class. And during that 20-minute time period, I asked my Student Government Association for suggestions that I could take back to the Student Engagement Subcommittee. In that time period, they gave me 2 whole pages of suggestions that I took back to my committee. Student-based funding means we are moving forward with funding considering students. I am ecstatic that Tennessee is moving forward with the student-based model. It has been an honor to serve with some of our best student leaders in the state, and I am certain that our future is exceedingly bright. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Jared?
Man, you never want to follow an awesome student representative. But first, I want to thank Governor Lee for this proposed billion-dollar investment in education. I mean, I'm a fourth-generation Tennessee educator, and this is significant. So thank you for making this effort. As the chair of the Chamber of Commerce Subcommittee, had the privilege of working with some really smart people, some really engaged folks that were very opinionated based on their constituency. You know, they say opinions are like noses, everybody's got one. Well, when it comes to education funding, everybody's got at least 3 opinions that they want to share. So my committee worked very hard. I'm very proud of the work they did. And through that process, even though there was a lot of opinions, one thing we all agreed on, and really all the folks I've talked with within my constituency, is that a student-based funding formula is the way to go for our state. From the rural perspective, there are unique challenges to every student demographic. And so that's no different with rural students. And the opportunity to meet some of those needs and meet students where they are is an opportunity that we haven't had in this state before, whether it's rural students, urban students. The fact that we're able to have a conversation around just identifying different demographics with unique needs is a huge progressive step for our state that I'm proud of as being at the center of this conversation of a student-based funding formula. From the workforce perspective, there are so many opportunities within our state that we could give our students access to, but even those opportunities are unique in how we approach it. We've got CTE programs that require different levels of funding. So from a workforce perspective, when we're looking at K-12 education in a way that not only acknowledges opportunities, but for once we're acknowledging that those opportunities cost different amounts of money to fund those programs, and the students themselves, the experiences they're going to have, that to me is saying that we are not just talking about education anymore in a K-12 sense, but we're also looking at those workforce needs and being responsive to employers across the state, because that's one thing as a chamber that we've tried to be very responsive to in our membership and in helping them create those talent pipelines to those jobs and to those opportunities. And if we don't do something significant in some of those areas and focus on those unique individual needs of each student's pathway into those pipelines, we're not going to see the results that we need to keep up with the workforce demands. So as from a rural perspective, from a workforce perspective, a student-based funding formula definitely makes the most sense. And again, as a fourth-generation educator, the timing of this was pretty interesting. I came across an article that my daddy wrote in 1974 about individualized education as a instructional method. And back then it was so revolutionary, he had to put an article in the paper about it to explain it to parents. And we've had individual instruction as a methodology for a long time. So I think it's also appropriate that we start having individual funding practices to align with that as well. Thank you.
Victor?
Thank you, Governor Lee, for the investment of $1 billion into public education. I think it's definitely time we look at our funding formula and make it more student-based. I had the privilege and honor of serving as the chair of the Economically Disadvantaged and Highly Mobile Student Subcommittee. We had a very diverse group of members who really took time to really invest in sharing the opinions and digging to the opinions and thoughts of people in their communities. We took a lot of time to bring those ideas back, talk amongst each other, talk amongst one another, and then make recommendations to Governor Lee and then to Commissioner Schwinn. And we're very pleased to see a lot of those recommendations made it into the framework. I really challenged my subcommittee members to focus on students, keep students at the center of this funding formula. The future leaders of our classroom, of our state, are in our classrooms today, as you saw today with our student here. And so it's really important that we continue to keep students at the forefront as we have these discussions about a new funding formula. As someone who, is a former educator, I'm really pleased to see that, such a bold approach is being taken to address the individual needs of students. When you look at our most at-risk students, so let's look at the economically disadvantaged students, those students in poverty, this funding formula really is digging deep into the individual needs of those students and not, prioritizing non-student needs, really focusing on what our students need to succeed in life, and so they have a chance, because that's what's important at the end of the day. So again, Governor Lee, thank you for the opportunity. Commissioner Schwinn, thank you. Thank you both for your leadership, and I look forward to continuing to engage in this discussion and this conversation, and it's definitely time for TISA, and so thank you all.
So I think what you just heard were three folks who have been able to outline why a student-based funding formula is so important. I think that when we think about our urban students, our students in rural communities, our students who are economically disadvantaged, we know that we need a weight or a base that funds all of their needs. We know we need weights that really emphasize the additional needs that some students might have, and we know we need additional funding for things like early literacy, CTE. That's what we heard across the board. But more than anything, I think what has made me feel so proud about the process and ultimately moving in a direction that is about students is what you heard from Elizabeth. I could not be more proud and more honored to have been able to witness your leadership and what that will mean for the state of Tennessee, because we have 1 million of Elizabeths in our classrooms right now. And that is our future, and it is inspiring and powerful, and to know that our students are part of that direction is one of the most meaningful components of building a policy about kids. So thank you for everything that you've done. Thank you to your parents, and certainly thank you to all of our subcommittee members who have helped to create a formula proposal that I think will benefit the most important part of our education system, which are the students in the buildings every day. Thank you, sir.
Commissioner, why don't you stay here for when we get into questions? That would make sense. Yeah. Well, I just want to, again, thank our guests for coming, and you represent a whole host of folks that were engaged, and we're grateful because we're putting together what we think is an investment in public education that's going to pay off for our students and pay off for the future of our state, and pay off for public education in Tennessee. And your comments reflect a tremendous amount of work that went in by people all across the state. So thanks for giving that additional input today. Thank you. Let's open up for questions. Casey, you want to do this? No, you're good. Vivian. Well, we certainly think that now's the time to do this, and there has been a very clear process that we've followed. The exact day of the bill language, we don't know exactly. There's a lot of work to be done, and we're working with legal teams, both with the legislature and in our office right now, to finalize that language so that it can be presented to the members of the legislature. There's a lot of work being done with committees and a framework and outlines that people are engaging in the meantime. But that language, we don't know the day, but we expect to have it soon. And when it's there, we think there's enough time for the legislature to work through it. I think most of them believe that as well, so we're very hopeful.
Is your expectation still to find something next week?
That's our hope. Hey, Kelsey.
No worries, hello. So have you heard any, or received any pushback from other counties that might be getting some charter schools coming their way anytime soon?
What we know is that there are charter schools in a number of counties in our state, and we think that that's an important part of public education. It gives additional choices for parents, and we have created, as you know, a charter commission, an authorizing commission, and we have a number of high-quality charter schools. We want to make sure that that commission creates a process that allows high-quality charters in our state and that shuts down those that are not high quality. So we're encouraged by the expansion of and growth of charter schools and all public schools in our state.
Governor, your budget funds the creation of a state holiday for Juneteenth. Just curious how you came to the decision to try to create that state holiday.
You know, there's a federal holiday there, and in order to be consistent with that very important day in our country's history, we felt it important to have a state holiday as well, and that included funding in the budget to make it such.
And you have since signed the redistricting map. Curious what your reasoning was to sign a map for Congress that would cut national freeways and potentially and likely get rid of Democratic representation.
Yeah, you know, our state fortunately has had significant growth, and particularly in Middle Tennessee. And every 10 years, that census then requires and creates an opportunity for, and a requirement for, and an obligation for the General Assembly to draw districts to accommodate the changes in that growth. And a lot of work went into that. We did not do that. The General Assembly did that, but that was completed and appropriate for me to sign.
Was there any consideration of how the map was drawn, or were you just going to sign something that came to you that?
I think there was a lot of consideration in the General Assembly about how the maps were drawn. Ultimately, they made those decisions. I think they followed the process that is laid out for them to do so, and that's why I signed it.
Now, Caitlin, sorry, go ahead. So there's been quite a bit of reaction to the funding meeting last week. Some people believe that art or music teachers could be replaced by a third party. Could these teachers be replaced?
You may need to answer that. I'm not sure the basis of your question. You know what she's talking about?
Yeah, I know. So there was so the answer is no. Art and music, it's actually in statute. If you are going to be a teacher of record, then you have to be a credentialed teacher as outlined by the state board. The question that was asked was about, will there still be flexibility as there is in the BEP in a new funding formula? There were a number of examples that were discussed. Some was on custodial contracts or hiring custodians. One was, could you also bring in a nonprofit to have additional art support, et cetera? That is allowable under the current formula. It would be allowable under a future formula. But to be clear, as the daughter of a teacher who is a single parent, and to be very, very clear for teachers out there, it absolutely would not replace a credentialed teacher in the classroom. It's critically important that we emphasize that point, given how hard our teachers have worked and the respect that they demand in terms of the work that they do.
But could a school district bring in a third party if, let's say, like a rural district doesn't have an art or music teacher?
I think we would want to encourage support for art if that is what a school wanted. It doesn't replace a credentialed teacher in a classroom. You could imagine a school that might have an arts emphasis in their programming and would want to use additional funding to expand an art program. That is absolutely possible. You don't necessarily need to do that in any one particular way. You could bring in a nonprofit. We have a lot of that happens in our after-school programs, or in elementary schools, we call them specials. But ultimately, we've got amazing art and music teachers across the state. They would continue to be in their positions, and that would continue to be funded in a future formula.
And you said it was a funding plan, not a spending plan, so we could always save money.
It's a funding plan because it is about how the money is generated. We do not tell districts how to spend that money. That is the material difference between the two.
Very quickly, Rick, ways that cut you off.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, do you have any details, or more recent details around the Hillsdale College, agreement that you made?
I think the Hillsdale College agreement is, or the Hillsdale College charter initiative is like any number of nonprofit charters that apply, and they will follow the exact same procedure that any other charter school operator does. A nonprofit charter operator that applies for schools in our state, that'll be the process that's followed with Hillsdale as well.
So you otherwise paid them to try and bring charter schools there, or made agreements?
Our conversations with Hillsdale are the same that we've had with other charter initiative programs.
We're gonna go in order right here, so Adam from Tennessee.
The Nashville is one of the three cities kind of a finalist for the Public National Convention. Do you think the state should provide any money towards the convention?
I think that we are certainly hopeful that the convention will come here. It would be a tremendous economic opportunity for our state. We would look at that as we would any other economic opportunity and consider investing in those. We do that on a regular basis. We look at at opportunities that would generate income for our state and incent those. But we haven't made any decisions about that. You know, I don't know if there is particularly or not. I can follow up with you and let you know that. Uh-huh.
You mentioned that you've heard a lot of feedback from your peers about school funding. What can you just summarize some of the feedback that you've heard from peers and things that you guys discussed in the subcommittee?
Absolutely. One of the biggest topics of discussion was funding for CTE, and I know that most of us in the subcommittee, as well as my peers back home at Coffee County, are heavily involved in CTE. I currently serve as the Tennessee FBLA state president, and personally for me, I didn't have FBLA in middle school, and so our subcommittee pushed for CTE and career exploration in middle school. That was one of our main focuses. We talked about ACT and dual enrollment and AP classes, but I think one of the main things we advocated for was CTE funding.
What is one thing that you think that we need to really pick up for lawmakers, or those of us who are in schools every day, aren't thinking about, or could be thinking about more when it comes to what high schoolers need?
I think high schoolers need more, I think they need more career exploration opportunities, because one of the things that I said in some of our meetings was when I got to high school, I was so confused on what career path to take, and lots of our students feel pressured to choose a certain career path. I know for me it's business, and I'm glad I chose that route, but I think students need to have more options when they get to high school. Of course.
I know in the summer that will be allocated as we do a new funding plan, like $500 this year is towards CTE. Is there any jeopardy that if a new formula isn't approved this session, that money might get allocated for something else?
Yeah. I mean, our hope is that these are tied together, and I think that's the approach that we're taking with the General Assembly. Ultimately, the General Assembly approves the budget that the governor delivers, but I think there's a understanding and agreement and a plan that those should go together.
Melissa? Speakers next to this afternoon said that we both type fit,
It would be what?
type fit this session to pass this legislation. You also heard some legislators who wonder what the rush is to get it done this session when whatever's proposed wouldn't be planned to go into effect this school year. What would be your response to that? And do you think that you have the legislative buy-in that you need in the next 4 weeks, next month?
Yeah. I think what's important is that we get details timely to the members of the legislature for them to look at, and which is what we're working to do, in order for them to have the time to get it done. I think that there is no better time than now. Every year that we wait is a year that we do not invest in our kids, in our public schools in the way that we ought to be. So if we can now, then we should not. That's the way I view it. I think that's the hope, and that's the message, and I think most of the lawmakers believe that to be the case. Well, our hope is that by the end of next week, we'll have language on the bill. We don't know that on a particular day. There is a lot of back and forth between legal teams to make sure that we get all the language exactly right. But our hope is to have that language finalized by next week, end of next week.
Yeah, Governor, the group of professional educators of Tennessee has argued that all $1 billion investment should be put into the current funding formula now, just to give more time to assess the impact of what any changes to the formula would be. Why would that not be the best case to put that extra investment that there is into the current formula now?
Well, we actually think the current formula is not a good formula. And investing significant dollars into a formula that's 30 years old and that is not funding students the way that they should be funding would not be a wise investment of Tennessee taxpayer dollars. So we have a responsibility to be stewards of those dollars. If we're going to spend a significant investment in public education, it ought to be done, in our view, in a way that is wisely spent.
Just on the other side of that, what would you say to some lawmakers, legislators who say that even the proposal that you have as proposed doesn't meet what students currently need?
Well, the language isn't out yet, and there will be a lot of back and forth and appropriate debate and input once that language is finalized or is finally presented. The language will likely change over the period of the session. So we're not at the end point with this piece of legislation yet. And I think we'll get there in a way with the input and partnership with the legislature that does accomplish what they want and we want as well.
Governor, there's a lot of talk about student-based funding formula and how everyone's excited about it, and we've all had conversations about it, but still very few details besides what options to take that need. Could you tell parents if language they can understand what's ahead for them if this passes?
I think the best way to say to a parent what we're hoping to accomplish is that you, as a parent, will know exactly the dollars that are going to be spent on your child in public education. You know your child's unique needs. If they're rural, if they are a child in an area of concentrated poverty, if they are a child with disabilities, if they're a child with special needs, there will be dollars that are attached to your child, regardless of the public school that your child attends. And I think that parents will then understand that their kid and their unique needs are being funded.
And how many charter schools would you like to see in Tennessee?
You know, what we want to have is quality charter schools. So there's not a number of charter schools that we want. There's a quality of charter schools that we want. We want to have opportunities for our kids to have public education options that are high quality for them, and that includes charters.
Yeah, the House committee yesterday passed a bill that would split up the appointments to the State Board of Education. And I believe your office lobbied pretty hard against the bill, but it still passed. Why such a big push against that bill? And what's your reaction to it moving on? It's like a big push.
Yeah, I'm first of all grateful for the members of the State Board of Education. And the process that we have is a good one. Confirmation by the General Assembly of appointments to that, but that passed through a committee. There'll be a process that goes on through the House and into the Senate, and we'll see where it goes. But And that's the process for any piece of legislation that rolls through. Well, I think the process is a good one as it stands, but the legislature will evaluate that.
We're gonna have to wrap up in a second. Andy, I wanna make sure, I know you got a question.
Well, Sam took mine, but I have another one.
Unfortunately or fortunately? It's fortunate, Andy. With you, it's fortunate.
Hillsdale College came under attack. It was under national news a number of years ago because the head of it said, who I believe still is the head of it, said the state officials that kept by, apparently there was questions raised about minority students, whether they allowed and how many and everything. He said they wanted to see if there were dark ones there. Use that term, which created historical controversy. And I guess, I mean, it's just, I mean, have you vetted these people? I mean, how serious are they? Is it credible? What kinds of institutions do they run? And are there any concerns that there may be discrimination in terms of who they accept?
Yeah, so they'll follow the same process that any charter school operator will in this state, and they'll go through the process of establishing a request for authorization of a school, and they'll be evaluated the same any other charter school would be.
Well, can any of these charter schools be religious schools?
They cannot be. They are secular schools, and these will be secular classical education schools. Hillsdale's charter schools in our state will be public, secular, classical education schools. Thank you.